The engine died at 11:47 in the morning, which was the first sign that things were going badly. The second sign was the silence, not the comfortable silence of a mountain road, but the deep, pressurized silence of a place that had never learned to tolerate the sound of human machines. Sergeant Mara Voss cut the ignition and listened. Around the transport crawler, the Kareth forest breathed, old growth, pre-contact, the kind of canopy that blocked out noon sun so completely that the ground below lived in a permanent, amber-tinged dusk. She had driven through forests like this on 3 other colony worlds. None of them had felt quite like this. None of them had felt hungry. Status, she said. Behind her, in the crawler's passenger compartment, she heard movement. 6 people, 2 geologists from the survey team, Dr. Fen Alika and his assistant, a young woman named Priya, who hadn't spoken more than 12 words since departure. A colonial liaison named Torres, soft-handed and overdressed for the terrain. 2 security contractors, Breck and Sully, good at looking capable and somewhat less good at being it, and 1 other, the xenobiologist, Dr. Yusuf Adair, who was already pressing his face to the side window with an expression that Mara had learned to dread, the expression of a scientist who had just seen something interesting. The power cell couplings sheared, called Breck from the back, his voice carrying the flat confidence of someone reading from a screen. Thermal overload. It's the humidity. The atmosphere here runs about 12% richer in particulate moisture than the pre-survey data suggested. The cell venting system clogged. How long to fix it? A pause. 4 hours. Maybe 5. Torres appeared at her shoulder, smelling of synthetic bergamot. We're due at the extraction point at 1900 hours. The shuttle doesn't hold 4. I know, Mara said. If we miss that window, I know. She opened the crawler door and stepped out into the Kareth forest, and the forest immediately pressed itself against her. Warm, dense, the air tasted of something ancient and biological, of nitrogen-heavy soil, and the particular sweetness of decaying wood that had been decaying for longer than any human civilization had been keeping. Gourds. She walked a perimeter. Standard. The kind of thing you did not because you expected to find anything, but because the habit of looking was. Habit that kept you alive. 40 meters out, back, north side, south side. On the east side, she stopped. There was a depression in the ground. Recent. The soil was still damp where something heavy had pressed into it, and the surrounding vegetation, thick-stalked purple-green ground cover that the survey team called tanglegrass, was bent outward from the center, point as if whatever made the impression had arrived fast and left the same way. The depression was shaped roughly like a 3-toed foot. It was roughly the size of a dining table. Mara crouched and measured it against her palm. She had large hands. She needed 7 handspans to cross it. She stood up, very calmly, and walked back to the crawler. Adair, she said, opening the door. I need you to look at something. The xenobiologist climbed out with his equipment satchel already open. He was a compact man, 50-ish, gray at his temples, in the way that happened to people who spent careers being worried about genuinely important things. Shh. He crouched at the depression for about 30 seconds without speaking. Then he pulled out a measuring rod and confirmed what Mara had already calculated. How old? She asked. 2 hours, 3 at most. He looked up at her. The survey drones detected heat signatures at range, but the resolution was. I know what the survey drones detected, Yusuf. He met her eyes. The Kareth Megafauna catalog lists 47 confirmed large species. The apex predators are Category 7 and above. Footprint morphology is consistent with a bipedal ambush predator, possibly in the Dino-Chiron family, adapted to English. Something with teeth the size of my forearm was standing 30 meters from this crawler approximately 2 hours ago. Mara nodded once. Okay. She thought for 3 seconds. Get everyone out of the crawler. Breck and Sully start on repairs now. Fen and Priya, stay within visual range. Torres. She looked at the liaison, who had followed them and was now staring at the footprint with the expression of a man whose entire understanding of what a bad day could be was being fundamentally revised. Stay close to me. What are you going to do? Torres asked. I'm going to think, Mara said, which was the truest answer she had. The first hour passed without incident. Breck and Sully worked on the power cell, with the kind of focused efficiency that reminded Mara why she had hired them regardless of their other Limitations. Priya helped Fen collect soil samples 20 meters out, close enough to call back, far enough that Mara could feel the distance like a splinter between her ribs. Adair sat on the crawler's running board and wrote notes in a way that looked meditative, and was probably terrified. The second hour was when the fire ants arrived. They came from the north, a rippling red-black carpet of them, moving across the tangle grass with the liquid, unstoppable motion of a tide. Mara saw them first. She was always looking north, because north was where the tree line thickened into genuine darkness, and what she saw made her stomach go cold and professional at the same time. The swarm was 60 meters wide, moving fast. Kareth fire ants were documented at 30 millimeters body length, with a venom delivery mechanism that caused tissue necrosis in mammals above, 30 kilograms within 45 seconds of a massed sting event. She was about to call the team back when she realized what was driving the ants. Behind them, from inside the dark tree line, came a sound, low, resonant, not a roar. She had been expecting something like a roar, the kind of primal, movie-ready sound that said predator in every vertebrate language. This was different. This was a subsonic pulse that she felt more in her chest cavity than heard with her ears, a rhythmic, almost mechanical pressure that the Kareth forest absorbed and returned amplified, like a canyon talking back. Then the trees moved, not wind. The trees moved from below, from the roots up, great trunks swaying as something passed between them, and what passed between them was 22 meters tall and moving at a speed that had no business existing in a body that size. It crossed from deep forest to forest edge in 4 strides. Each stride landed with enough force to send a visible ripple through the tangle grass, a shockwave that preceded the creature by a full second. It was not. Mara's mind did the rapid, necessary work of categorization. It was not a dinosaur in the way that children's books meant. It was what evolution had done on a world seeded with different base materials, with the same basic problem: build a predator large enough to dominate all other life. The solution was almost identical to what Earth had once produced: bilateral symmetry, massive hind limbs, forward-facing sensory organs clustered at the apex of a head that was mostly jaw, 2 smaller forelimbs vestigial in proportion, but still tipped with curved implements that Mara's training cataloged as tertiary hunting tools, primary ones. The primary tool was the jaw. The jaw was open. Everyone in the crawler, Mara said, at normal volume, which was the voice she used when the situation had moved past the phase where shouting would help. Now quietly. Nobody argued. This, she reflected, was one of the few advantages of a genuinely terrifying situation. It was clarifying. Torres, who had been about to argue about something every 40 minutes for the last 6 hours, moved with admirable speed. Fen grabbed Priya's arm, and Suli dropped their tools and climbed. The creature stopped at the tree line. It turned its head, slowly, the massive neck swiveling with the kind of deliberateness that very large, very confident things had. The movement of something that had never been surprised in its life. And the cluster of sensory organs on that head oriented toward the crawler. Mara was the last one in. She climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the door and did not, crucially, slam it. "Is it locked?" Torres whispered. "Crawlers rated for impacts up to 12 metric tons, Mara said. That thing is approximately 40 metric tons.
It's not an answer to my question.
No, Mara agreed. It's not. The creature stood at the tree line for 90 seconds. Mara counted. Shh. It was the kind of counting she did in firefights. The internal metronome that her training had built into her, over 20 years of colony security. The clock that kept running even when everything else in her head went quiet. 1, 2, 3. Creature's chest expanded and contracted in a rhythm that was almost leisurely. Its sensory organs tracked the crawler. Its jaw, Mara noticed, was no longer open. It had closed with a soft, wet sound that was somehow worse. Then, on the 91st second, it looked away. Not because it had lost interest. She understood that immediately. It looked away the way cats looked away from prey they had decided to take later. A deliberate signal that it had registered the situation, evaluated it, and chosen its timing. Kareth fire ants poured around the crawler's wheels and kept moving south. "Breck," Mara said. "How long now?" 3 hours. His voice was steady. She gave him credit for that. "I need to get back outside too. You're not going outside while that thing is watching us." It left. It went back into the forest. It went back into the forest the way someone steps back from a poker table, Mara said. It's still in the game. We wait 20 minutes. They waited 20 minutes. Nothing moved at the tree line. Mara spent those 20 minutes doing the thing she always did in the waiting, running the math. They were 6 kilometers from the extraction point along the survey trail. Trail width, approximately 3 meters. Carved through Kareth primary growth by automated machines 6 weeks ago. Wide enough for a crawler, not wide enough for a Category 7 ambush predator to move at full speed. The trail was, in other words, a small but meaningful tactical advantage. The open road was never safe. The road with constraints was slightly safer. The crawler was dead. That was the central problem. 4 wheels, 2 metric tons of colonial survey equipment, and a power cell that was bleeding thermal energy into the Kareth humidity. To get to the extraction point in time for the shuttle, which would not wait, because shuttles in the outer colonial territories operated on schedule compliance because the alternative was chaos. She needed either the crawler, working or another way. Adair, she said. The Megafauna Catalog. Category 7 bipedal ambush predators. What do they respond to? The xenobiologist had been sitting very still, writing notes in his small, precise handwriting. He looked up. Responds to? Stimuli. Drives them off. What brings them in? What makes them? She searched for the word, predictable. Adair was quiet for a moment. This was his best quality. He never answered before he had thought. They're territorial rather than nomadic. The one we saw is defending this zone, which means it won't pursue beyond the zone boundary. Where's the boundary? Unknown. The survey data suggests the primary forest thins at approximately 4 kilometers from here, transitioning to secondary growth, probably the edge of usable territory for something that size. 4 kilometers, Mara repeated. And the fire ant column? Moving south. Seasonal behavior. They're following a thermal gradient. The column will clear our position in approximately 90 minutes. So if we move through the ants or after them. After them puts us on the trail at dusk. She looked at the tree line. In the dark. Yes, Adair said. Does. The decision was not hard, in the sense that very few decisions were actually hard once you stripped away the fear and left only the variables. Hard decisions and frightening decisions were different things. Mara had spent her career learning that distinction. Here's what we're going to do, she said, and she said it at normal volume, because she had found, through experience, calm voices in crisis situations carried more authority than loud ones. Brexuli, continue repairs, taking both options simultaneously. If the crawler is ready in 3 hours, we drive. If it isn't, we walk. Either way, we're moving at sundown. Starting from now, I want everything non-essential stripped from the crawler and cached. We carry only what matters. Fen, yeah, I need your geological survey packs. The stabilizer frames in them are structural. She paused. We're going to build something. Build what? Torres asked. Mara had already opened the supply cache at the back of the crawler and was pulling out utility tether. High-tensile polyfiber, rated at 2,000 kilograms. In the Vareka Valley campaign, you won't know it. It was pre-colonial territory. For security action, we had a similar problem. Something large in the dark. Couldn't fight it. Couldn't outrun it. Had to make the environment complicated enough that the advantage shifted. She laid the tether out and began measuring lengths. Every predator has a threat calculation system. It doesn't matter if it evolved on Earth or Kareth Fourth or anywhere else. If the caloric cost of pursuing prey exceeds the caloric gain, an evolved predator will not pursue. That's not psychology. That's thermodynamics. You're going to make it not worth chasing us, Priya said. It was the most she had spoken since departure. I'm going to try, Mara said. What they built over the next 2 hours was ungainly, improvised, and, she hoped, exactly sufficient. The geological stabilizer frames were meter-long carbon composite rods used to anchor survey sensors in loose soil. There were 14 of them across 2 packs. Mara drove them into the ground, in a pattern she laid out in the dirt with her finger first, explaining once, not twice. The tether went between them at varying heights, creating a web structure along a 40-meter section of the trail south of the crawler. The noisemakers were Breck's contribution. He had, in one of those pieces of luck that occasionally punctuated disasters, a set of emergency signal pyrotechnics in his kit, the kind designed to burn bright and loud for 30 seconds. She fit these to the tether at intervals, rigged to trigger on contact. It's a tripwire field, Torres said, studying the construction with the focused attention of someone filing it under unaccepted. It's a noise and light barrier. The predator is using thermal and acoustic sensing. The survey drones confirmed that the Karath megafauna in this region have weak photoreceptive systems and compensate with pressure wave hearing. Loud, bright, sudden stimuli at multiple points simultaneously should trigger the avoidance response. She stepped back and looked at what they had made. It was not beautiful. It would do. The key word is should. Comforting, said Torres. I'm not trying to comfort you, Mara said. I'm trying to get you home. The crawler's power cell came online at 1734, which was 2 hours and 26 minutes ahead of Breck's estimate. Mara revised her opinion of him upward again. He had worked with his shirt soaking through in the Karath humidity and his hands slick with thermal, coolant, and he had not complained once, which was the thing she would remember about him afterward. Can she move? Mara asked. She can move, said. Not fast. The coupling repair is temporary. I basically wired around the thermal regulation, so if we push speed above 40%, the cell will overheat again. 40% is fine. She did the math. 6.4 kilometers at 40% speed is approximately 22 minutes. Assuming the trail is clear. Assuming the trail is clear, she agreed. She looked at the forest. The light was changing. Karath IV ran a 31-hour day, and they were moving into the long amber slide toward evening, the sky above the canopy, shifting from bleached white to something the color of old copper. The fire ant column had passed 4 hours ago. The tree line had been still for 90 minutes. She was not foolish enough to believe that still meant safe. Load up, she said. Leave the tripwire field in place. We trigger it remotely if we need to. Drive out slow. The crawler moved south on the trail at a trail a crawl, literally, pace that was almost indistinguishable from walking. Mara drove with the windows polarized down to nothing, her full senses open to the forest. She drove with her left hand and kept her right on the secondary system panel where the remote trigger for the pyrotechnics sat, a green button that she had covered with a strip of adhesive so she would not hit it by accident. For 3 minutes nothing happened. Then the trail curved around a stand of primary growth Karath trees, enormous, buttressed things that looked like they had been designed by someone who had seen Earth's old-growth redwoods in photographs, and decided to make them taller, and the creature was there. It was standing in the center of the trail, not moving. Just standing. Something stands when it has already decided. It is in the right place. And the universe will simply have to accommodate that. In the amber light, with the forest pressing in from both sides, it was simultaneously less terrifying and more terrifying than before. Less, because Mara's mind had had 3 hours to prepare, and prepared minds handled things better. More, because she could now see the detail, the texture of the hide, something between scales and roughened leather, a deep mottled gray-green that was so precisely the color of the Karath bark that it was clearly not coincidence. The sensory cluster at the head, the jaw which was again closed. It was, she registered in some distant, calm part of her mind, watching them, not hunting. Watching. Nobody move, she said. The crawler was at a full stop 10 meters from the creature. Breck, Sully, I need you to not touch anything for about 30 seconds. What are you doing? Torres asked, thinking. Mara said. And then Yusuf, yes, you said territorial, not nomadic. It's not chasing us, because chasing us cost more than it gains. So why is it standing in the road? A pause. She could feel Adair processing, establishing parameters, he said slowly. A territorial ambush predator. It doesn't just defend the territory from prey. It establishes the territory's rules. It's not hunting us, it's telling us something. What is it telling us? This is the boundary, Adair said. It's showing us the edge. Mara looked at the creature. The creature, via its sensory array, looked at the crawler, tree cover behind it. She could see it now, in the flat amber light, was thinning. Secondary growth beginning. The transition point, Adair had identified from the survey data. The creature was standing exactly on the line between its territory and the territory. Beyond. It walked us out, Mara said. I believe so, Adair said quietly. It has been maneuvering us. Since the first sighting, moving the ants. Positioning itself. It wanted us moving south on this trail. It wanted us moving toward the boundary. Yes. Mara sat with that for 3 seconds. Something ancient and very specifically human moved through her chest. Not quite awe, not quite fear. Something that lived between them. Feeling of recognizing intelligence in a thing that had no obligation to be intelligent by any framework you had brought with you. She had felt it before, twice. Once on Heron's world, with the cephalopod colony that communicated through bioluminescent pattern. Once at a research station on Ceres, watching the first successful neural mapping of a whale. The feeling was, hello. The creature held its position for exactly 7 more seconds. Then it turned. The massive body pivoting with that same deliberate, hurried grace, and walked back into the primary growth. The trees received it. The forest was still. Beyond the tree line, the trail opened into secondary growth, and beyond that, the extraction point's marker lights were already blinking in the early evening. Nobody spoke for about 15 seconds. Then Taurus said, "Was that?" and stopped. "Yes," Mara said. "Did it just?" "Yes, that's drive." Adair said, very gently from the back. "We can be astonished when we're on the shuttle." Mara put the crawler in gear. They made the extraction point at 1851, 9 minutes to spare. The shuttle pilot, a woman named Gresh who had the specific impatience of someone paid per flight hour and not per passenger comfort, had already run 3 of her 4 pre-launch sequences. Mara climbed out of the crawler and handed Gresh the incident report tablet, and Gresh looked at the timestamp and the location data and the attached sensor logs, and said in a very flat voice, "The Category 7 signature. That's confirmed?" "Firmed," Mara said. 40 metric tons, bipedal, primary forest apex predator. Confirmed, and it let you go. Mara thought about the creature at the tree line. The 7 seconds it had held position. The precise location it had chosen to stand. "I think," she said carefully, "that it made a decision. The same way any sufficiently complex system makes a decision when it models the cost-benefit of an action and determines the action is suboptimal." She handed back the tablet. "It evaluated us, found us expensive. Let us go." She looked at her for a moment. "That's not how Category 7s are supposed to work." "No," Mara agreed. "It's not." She climbed the shuttle ramp. For her, the Kareth forest was a dark wall against the copper sky, enormous and self-contained and utterly indifferent to the small human drama that had briefly troubled its eastern edge. She looked at it for one more moment from the top of the ramp. She had the distinct sensation, not fear, not wonder, something cleaner than either, of being seen. The ramp closed. On the shuttle, in the 20 minutes before Gresh pushed them up through Karath IV's atmosphere, nobody slept. Torres stared out the viewport with the expression of a man permanently revised. Breck and Sully sat quietly, which was the most genuine quiet she had ever seen from them. Priya held her soil sample cases in her lap and looked at nothing. Fen wrote quickly in his field journal, the pen moving fast. The scientist's trained reflex to capture before memory softened. Adair came and sat beside Mara in the forward row, and did not speak for a while, which was why she liked him. Eventually he said, "Filing protocols for megafauna encounters require we submit the sensor data within 48 hours. I know. Kareth Territory Commission will want to establish no approach zones. Probably a full sector exclusion." He paused. "It may delay the resource survey by years." "I know." He was quiet again then. "Do you think it knew we were going to do that? That one encounter would." He stopped. "Protect it?" Mara looked at the dark shape of the planet through the viewport as the shuttle banked. "I don't know what it knew. I know what it did. It had 6 hours and 6 separate opportunities to kill us all, and it didn't. It sorted us, moved us, delivered us to the boundary, and showed us the door." She was quiet for a second. "That's not instinct. Instinct doesn't do geometry." "No," Adair said, "it doesn't." Below them, Kareth IV turned. Dark on the night side, amber and green on the day side. Patient, very old. Absolutely certain of itself in the way that very large, very intelligent things sometimes were. "I want to go back," Priya said suddenly. 2 rows back. Her voice was very young and very certain. "When they open the study protocols, I want to go back." Nobody told her that was foolish. Nobody told her it was brave either. Those were the wrong words for what it was. The shuttle reached escape velocity, and the planet fell away beneath them. And Mara let out a breath she had been holding since 11:47 in the morning, 6 hours and 14 minutes ago, when an engine had died in a forest that had been alive for longer than humanity had been keeping time. The second expedition was approved 14 months later. By that point, Adair had published 3 papers on the Karath apex predator. He had named the species Carathosaurus intellector, a name that generated considerable argument in the xenobiology community on the grounds that the intellector designation was premature, that the evidence base was a single encounter interpreted through the cognitive framework of a traumatized survey team. Pattern recognition was not intelligence, and territorial behavior was not communication. And the human tendency to see minds in everything was a well-documented and well-criticized bias. He noted the arguments, he submitted his data, he waited. Mara was not part of the second expedition. She was offered a slot and turned it down without explaining why, which she was aware was unusual. She filed the paperwork, transferred the security contract to a colleague, and returned to Earthside Station, where she spent 3 weeks doing nothing in particular. Walking, sleeping, eating food that had been grown in actual soil, before she realized what was bothering her. It was the 7 seconds. Creature had held its position for 7 seconds, not 6, not 8, 7, a duration that was, in the playback of her suit sensors, absolutely precise. No creature on Earth or off it paused for exactly 7 seconds by accident. A pause that precise was timed, measured, deliberate. She had spent months telling herself that she did not know what the creature had known. That was true. She did not know what it knew. She knew what it had done, and what it had done was count. And count again. And hold at 7. With the patience of something that understood that the number mattered. Sheem. She pulled up the sensor logs on the night of the encounter and went through them methodically, the way she had been trained to go through incident reports. Not looking for what you expected, looking for what was there. She was looking for 7s. It was a long shot. It was the kind of thing that, if she found it, would change everything, and if she didn't, she would have spent a night staring at numbers for nothing. She found 8 of them. 7 seconds at the first sighting. 7 strides from the tree line to the position above the crawler's footprint. She had walked the distance herself. She knew her own stride length. She counted the creature's recorded pressure wave impacts in the sensor data. 7 minutes between the departure of the fire ant column's leading edge and the first emergence of the apex predator from the primary growth. 7 minutes between the crawler's power cell coming online and the creature's appearance on the trail. 7 meters. She measured it 3 times, and then a 4th to be certain. Between the creature's standing position on the trail and the beginning, the secondary growth tree line. 7777. 8 instances of 7 across a 6-hour encounter with a life form that had never, in any recorded survey data, demonstrated numerical behavior. She filed a supplemental report. She attached her methodology. She attached the raw data. She flagged it with the notation. Possible deliberate numerical communication. Requires follow-up. The Karath Territory Commission acknowledged receipt. The Xenobiology Review Board noted the submission. 3 researchers described her methodology as suggestive but inconclusive, and 2 described it as a significant leap. 1. A woman at the University of New Nairobi named Dr. S.E. Park, who had spent 20 years studying cephalopod mathematical communication, sent a personal message that said only, "Send me everything." Priyako was on the second expedition. She had completed her doctoral program in 8 months, a record, with a dissertation on Karath primary forest biome structure that her committee described as either brilliant or reckless or both. She carried Mara's sensor log data as a personal reference file. She had memorized it. What the second expedition found, in 7 weeks of carefully boundary-respecting observation from the secondary growth tree line, was this. The Carathosaurus intellector population of the primary forest numbered, by thermal signature count, approximately 400 individuals, distributed across a territory of 11,000 square kilometers. They were not solitary. The survey data's assumption of solitary territorial behavior was wrong. The expedition's bioacoustic sensors, placed at the tree line and left for 6 weeks, recorded a complex subsonic communication pattern that repeated in 22 distinct base sequences, each sequence comprised of between 3 and 12 discrete pulses. The pattern was not random. It was not seasonal. It repeated, with variations, continuously. It was by every formal measure the xenobiology team could apply: language, not a language, the foundation of a language, the irreducible structures from which meaning was constructed, syntax, recursion, the capacity to refer to things not immediately present. They had been talking for a very long time, in frequencies that human ears could not detect, and human instruments had never, until now, been calibrated to hear. They talked about territory, which was known. They talked about each other, which was expected. And they talked. Priya Ko's instruments caught this on day 31, in a sequence that she played back 11 times before she trusted herself to down. They talked about the humans, not the specific humans, not Mara and Adere and Torres and the others, but humans as a category, a pattern in the subsonic dialogue that the team's analysis software flagged as a recurring reference to an external entity: small, warm, fast-moving, loud, prone to building things, present in the territory for a brief period, gone, a thing the forest had encountered, and then. The sequence repeated 3 times with the same structure. Remembered. Priya sent Mara the acoustic data the night she decoded the reference pattern. She sent it with no message, no framing, no explanation, just the raw audio file and the analysis breakdown and the timestamp. Mara listened to it on her kitchen table at 3 in the morning with a cup of tea going cold beside her. The subsonic harmonics were inaudible. Her speakers couldn't reproduce them, but the analysis breakdown translated them into a visual frequency map, and she looked at the frequency map for a long time. Then she wrote back, 7? Priya's response came 4 minutes later, 7. The pulse pattern that referred to humans contained 7 bass pulses, not 6, 6, not 8. Mara sat with that for a while. There was a version of this story, she thought. That was a story about danger survived. The engine dying at 11:47, the fire ants, the apex predator at the tree line, the tripwire field, and the improvised repairs and the 9-minute margin before the shuttle parted. That version of the story was true, and it was the version that the Colonial Territory Commission put in its incident report, and it was the version that led to the exclusion zone, and the protection protocols, and the 14 months before the second expedition. There was another version. In the other version, something in the Kareth primary forest had been watching human beings since the first survey drones crossed its territory 2 years before the expedition. Something had been building a model, the way all complex, intelligent systems built models of things they encountered. A model of these small, warm, fast-moving, loud creatures who came in machines and built things and then left. It had observed, categorized, filed. And when those creatures arrived in the forest in a broken machine with 6 hours of daylight left, it had made a decision, not whether to kill them. That decision would have been made in a different direction. The decision it had made was more interesting. It was the decision to teach, demonstrate in the only vocabulary available, space, time, number, that the territory had an owner who was paying attention, to herd the intruders south, to the boundary, with patience and precision, and a chosen number that could not possibly be accidental, and to stand at that boundary for exactly 7 seconds, so that anything paying attention would understand that the 7 was a choice. To say, we know you are here, to say, we have counted, to say now go, and they had gone, and the forest had remembered, and now 14 months later, the frequency maps were spread across Mara's kitchen table at 3 in the morning, and the pulse pattern that meant humans had 7 base pulses, and somewhere on the night side of Kareth IV, an apex predator, 4 times the weight of any land animal that had ever walked the earth, was, in a language made of sound too deep for human hearing, remembering the day it had escorted 6 small creatures to the border of its world and sent them home. Mara looked at the frequency map for a long time. Then she got up, poured the cold tea down the sink, made a fresh cup, and sat back down at the table and began to write. She was writing a proposal. It was addressed to the Kareth Territory Commission, the Xenobiology Review Board, and Dr. Essie Park at the University of New Nairobi. It began with the incident data and the supplemental report, and Priya Ko's acoustic analysis. It built, carefully, evidence to interpretation to implication. It did not use the word intelligence until the 14th paragraph. by which point the evidence trail made the word feel like a claim and more like a conclusion that the data had reached on its own. It ended with a question. The question was, if they had been paying attention to us since the first drones crossed their territory, what else have they learned? And if they can count, if they chose a number deliberately and carried it across a 6-hour encounter and then embedded it in the way they talk about us, what other messages have been there, in frequencies we couldn't hear, in the years before any human thought to listen? She sent the proposal at 4:17 in the morning and went to bed and slept without dreaming. It was unusual for her. And when she woke up at 9, there were 22 responses. The first response was from Torres. She had not expected that. The liaison had gone back to his administrative role after the expedition, had submitted the required reports, had not been in contact. His message was short. It said, "I read the frequency paper. I think I was wrong about what happened on the trail. I thought it was trying to decide whether to kill us. I think now it had already decided not to, and everything after that was." He had paused. She could tell from the timestamp gap between sentences. "I don't have the right word. I keep thinking about the 7 seconds. 7 seconds is a long time to hold still when you're 40 metric tons. You hold still for 7 seconds because the message matters." Mara read it twice. Then she wrote back, "Yes." She closed her tablet and looked out the window. See, Earthside Station in the morning was a particular kind of ordinary. Other people going to work, the transit systems running, the smell of food vendors on the concourse below, the unremarkable accumulation of a civilization that had, over several thousand years, built itself from nothing to this. Ships and stations, and colony worlds and encounter protocols, and frequency analysis software sophisticated enough to hear something that had been talking in the dark for longer than humanity had been standing upright. She thought about the forest, the amber light, Crawler's dead engine, the creature at the tree line, vast and utterly certain of itself, holding 7 seconds with a patience that made her feel, even now, like she was the younger thing in the room. They were still out there. All 400 of them, in 11,000 square kilometers of primary forest that the exclusion zone now protected. Talking to each other in their subsonic language, remembering the small, warm, fast things that had come and gone and been counted. Watching, presumably, as the new expedition's instruments appeared at the tree line. Watching with the calm, territorial attention of something that had decided to allow this particular category of intrusion, because the calculus of what it cost and what it gained had been assessed and found acceptable. The forest had made room. Humanity's job, Mara thought, was to be worth the room. Picked up her tablet and started the next document. It was titled simply, "Protocol for Extended Non-Invasive Contact." Would take her 3 months to write, and another 8 months to get through the relevant review boards, and another year after that before anyone set foot on Caratha 4th again with her protocols in hand. But the frequency map was still on her kitchen table, and the 7 base pulses of the pattern that meant human were still there in the data, and, somewhere, in the dark of a forest that had never needed to be discovered to know what it was, something was waiting with the patience that came from being very large, very old, and very sure that anything worth knowing would eventually find its way to the threshold and knock. The humans knocked, in their fashion, which was to say, imperfectly, loudly, at some considerable personal risk, arriving in broken machines and leaving footprints in soil too ancient to care and making, in the general chaos of their passage, enough impression to be remembered. It was, all things considered, enough.